The US rejects the UN's nominee for Peace Envoy to Libya. And President Donald Trump has threatened to cut funding for the institution. What does this mean for relations between a superpower and an organization meant to bring the world together? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. Now, relations between the United States and the United Nations have sometimes been rocky. Various governments have threatened to cut the funding or even have its headquarters moved out of New York. But the US is still the biggest financial backer of the institution. Well, now, President Donald Trump's White House is rejecting the UN's nominee, Salam Fayyad, for the role of Peace Envoy to Libya. Fayyad is a former Palestinian Prime Minister. A spokesman for UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he would be serving in a personal capacity and not as a representative of any government. But the new US ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, is moving to block the appointment. She says Trump's administration is very disappointed at his selection for the role. In a statement, Ambassador Haley said, "For too long, the UN has been unfairly biased in favor of the Palestinian Authority to the detriment of our allies in Israel. The United States does not support the signal this appointment would send within the UN. However, we encourage the two sides to come directly together on a solution. Going forward, the United States will act, not just talk, in support of our allies." Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has responded to Salam Fayyad's nomination too. He says, "Several days ago I was informed of the possibility of the appointment of Salam Fayyad to a UN position. I said that the time has come for reciprocity in the UN's relations with Israel, and free gifts cannot be constantly given to the Palestinian side. The time has come for positions and appointments to be made to the Israeli side as well. Should there be an appropriate appointment, we will consider it." Well, let's bring our guest into the show. We have in Amman, Moeen Rabbani, the former head of political affairs at the Office of the UN Special Envoy for Syria. In Montreal, Ambassador Mukhtar Lamani, a former Arab League and UN diplomat. And in Nashville, Scotty Neil Hughes, Chief Political Correspondent for USA Radio Network. Welcome to you all. Mukhtar, you've worked with the UN. Help us to understand this. The UN spokesman says the Secretary General thought he had the approval of all Security Council members before he made the proposal. Suddenly, consensus isn't the case. What happened, do you think?
Yes, well, to take into consideration all the recent development. First of all, the Secretary General is new, and I think this is the very high-level first appointment by him. But unfortunately, he is dealing with a new American administration with a lot of amateurism, and also the fact that they were so used with former Secretary General to intervene in so many things. It's happening since the time of Dag Hammarskjöld, this kind of intervention by the P5, especially by the Americans.
All right, so Scotty, how do you interpret this? Was this the result of a new Secretary General maybe getting comfortable with the process, or was this the result of a new US administration that doesn't mind doing 180s on decisions?
Or C, a little bit of both of above. I think this is a show of both. I think the first guest is correct, that this is a new Secretary General getting used to relations and getting used to his office. But also I think this was once again just a communication issue that was going on with the United States. However, you have seen where Nikki Haley's office has come out and said that there was never any sort of promise or any sort of approval of this. So wherever this speculation is coming, I think we're in a time right now of adjustment where the United States is once again having to show that they are not the same as the last two administrations have been in their dealings with the United Nations.
All right, I could see Mukhtar wants to say something there. I'll give you a brief opportunity before we go to Moeen. Go ahead, Mukhtar.
There's one thing, concerning the appointment of special envoys. According to my very modest experience, mediating between people that are killing each other, you need a real condition to to move. And this condition, they have to be tired. If they are not tired, you can do nothing. And the UN is making a mistake. They have to have special envoys all over the world, wherever. I think if it is the case, they should be frank, with the Security Council, with the international community, just because it's a matter now of credibility. And I hope, with the new Secretary General, I know he has a lot of will to make a lot of changes, but working with the current administration will not be that easy.
Let's talk about that now, Moeen. I mean, if it is option C, as Scotty put it there, a bit of both, okay, a new Secretary General getting used to things, I guess time will fix that. If there is some internal communications issue in the decision-making of the Trump White House, where does that leave international diplomacy?
Well, if it's a bit of both, the both here consists of, on the one hand, rank amateurism by the Trump administration, and on the other, a rather pernicious anti-Palestinian sentiment, because, just as the new National Security Council advisor, Michael Flynn, didn't discuss sanctions with the Russians and then suddenly can't recollect whether he did or he didn't, here we already have very credible press reports that the nomination of Salam Fayyad was shared not only with the US government, that is to say the Trump administration, but had in fact been green-lighted by none other than the American ambassador to the permanent representative to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, who
Scotty's argument was that's been denied. Nikki Haley said those...
Yeah, well, a lot of things are being denied, but these are very credible reports by very credible
saying it has.
journalists. Okay. And again, I think we're dealing here in the realm of alternative facts, and it won't be long before the truth will be confirmed about what actually happened. Be that as it may,
let me give Scotty a brief opportunity. I promise I'll come back to you, Moeen, but I could see Scotty wanted to get in there.
I'm not going to go so juvenile with pointing out the alternative facts. I mean, the realistic part is President Trump, even on the campaign trail, said that he had some major issues with the United Nations. Under no circumstance would this have probably been approved. Let's just use the line of thinking. The Palestinian Authority is not even recognized by the U.S. as a state. How? Why would we approve a UN petition such as this?
I'm going to try and jump in, if I could, Scotty. Just let you, before we go into that issue, to address the point which Moeen raised, which basically was, doesn't this Trump administration so far have, shall we say, less than ideal record on credibility when it comes to saying what happened or what didn't happen in conversations?
Well, once again, we don't have, as much as he is saying that we have, you have Nikki Haley denying it, her office denying it. You're saying, well, it's been proven. Where? Where is the proof? Once again, you have a lot of journalists.
No one said it's been proven. It's a statement, isn't it, by the spokesman for the UN Secretary General saying...
Actually, she said, based on the information available to him at the time, the Secretary General had the perception. There is no fact, there is no tangible confirmation that we were going to go along with this. This was somebody in the office, a perception, a thought, not facts whatsoever.
Okay, I promised I'll come back to Moeen, so let's give him a shot at this too.
Very credible reports by very credible journalists with a long track record who are now stating that, in fact, both the U.S. administration and the American permanent representative to the UN personally had green-lighted this appointment. I believe it's only a matter of time before that will need to be confirmed on the record, and then once again we'll be able to confirm, that the one thing that is juvenile here is the Trump administration and the way it's dealing, whether domestically or internationally. I mean, as a matter of procedure, the Secretary General of the United Nations does not need the consent and approval of the Security Council to appoint a special representative. So as a matter of principle, he could appoint whomever he wants, even if the US or any other member of the Security Council is opposed to that appointment. But as a matter of politics, if he runs into opposition, particularly by one of the permanent five members, that appointment will probably be off. Now, as far as
let me just jump in there, Moeen, because you've transitioned us into my next talking point anyway, which I want to take to Mukhtar, and I promise I'll come back to you at some point. But Mr. Mukhtar, given your experience, you know, Mr. Moeen there says it. Technically, legally, according to the rules of the UN, this doesn't mean that Mr. Fayyad's candidacy is over. But practically speaking, is it really over now if you've already got the US ambassador to the UN on the record saying they don't like this?
Well, I think the practice is that all Secretary Generals, you know, historically, they have to work with the Security Council and the P5, and of course avoiding any problem, especially if the will is to resolve some kind of problems. So consulting and contacting, I think it's a positive thing. The new element I heard just this morning, that it seems, you know, after the declaration of the person of the UN, that it seems that they said they're going to appoint also the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Israeli one, Tzipi Livni, in a very high position, because the Secretary General thought that both the Palestinian and the Israeli were never in a very high position in the UN. And they are making some contact, according to some media report, with the Americans to withdraw their blockage against the Palestinian candidate, and to have both, you know, a Palestinian and an Israeli.
All right, that was a point which Scotty touched on there. What is wrong then? Let me give you the opportunity. You started talking about Palestine is not a state. Is that the basis for which? What is wrong with the Secretary General nominating somebody that he thinks his track record, his history is appropriate for a job, regardless of his nationality?
There's nothing wrong with it. That is his right, but it's also just like the United States right, when they're controlling 22% of the total budget, sit on the Security Council to be able to deny that, because they feel like for far too long America has not stood up to the UN in regards to her friend Israel. And now you have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu coming into town on Tuesday with President Trump. I think once again, the U.S. is going to go in here and they're going to reaffirm their support for a country that they feel like has been abused far too long. Last year, 40 different resolutions against Israel came from the UN, 4 against any other country from the world.
But also, in all fairness, Scotty, I mean, critics would say the US does have the record for vetoing the largest number of resolutions on the issue of Israel.
Absolutely, but here's where, this is why I think why we're having to see the Secretary General of the UN actually have to appeal to the US probably a little bit more now than the past. For once, you have a president who is not afraid to withdraw the United States from the UN, and you have a lot of support within Congress on both sides of the aisle. This is the nuclear fallout from the effect of the bill for the resolution that was passed in December, and you have a Congress and a legislative branch and an executive branch who would both consider pulling out, seriously pulling out of the United Nations, which would totally change the entire dynamic of the United Nations going forward. So the Secretary General of the UN has to be very careful right now in how they're handling the United Nations and what their wishes are in regards to whether it be Israel or any other piece of foreign policy.
All right, Scotty's raised a really important point there, and it begs the question, you know, the US, of course, has had something of a complicated relationship with the UN, you could say. In 1971, it strongly opposed a UN resolution to admit the People's Republic of China in place of the Republic of China, which at the time only had control over Taiwan. The US had wanted for both to be admitted separately, but that motion was defeated. In 2003, the US famously failed to convince the Security Council to support its invasion of Iraq, but it went ahead regardless, creating what it called a coalition of the willing. And in recent years, the US has threatened to slash funding for the UN unless the Security Council repealed its resolution condemning illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank. In the last days of the Obama administration, though, the US allowed a vote to go through condemning those settlements. Let me bring that point back to Moeen this time. I mean, what Scotty's pointing out now is true, that this is the first time you've had a US president seems to be talking about perhaps even withdrawing from the UN. There is a bigger question, bigger picture question here, is there not, about the whole approach of the Trump presidency towards the UN?
That's actually inaccurate. Previous American administrations have withdrawn from a variety of UN agencies and have spoken at least as negatively about the UN as an institution as the trumpeters are.
But withdrawing membership entirely, Moeen, from the UN? I mean, we've got congressmen who have introduced a bill to terminate UN membership completely.
Well, I suspect it's not the first time we've heard this. Look, you know, there's this expectation that the United Nations should behave, you know, if not as a branch of the Israeli Likud party, then at the very least as a branch of the U.S. Republican Party. And that's simply not going to happen with an international body. I mean, if we look, for example, at the resolution that was passed in December of last year about Israeli, the illegality of Israeli settlements, even the Reagan administration supported similar resolutions. And in fact, the Obama administration was about to become the first American administration which in 2 terms had systematically blocked any statement by the Security Council on the illegality of Israeli settlements. So the idea that this is somehow, you know, some profoundly anti-Israeli act, that can exist only in the minds of people as thoroughly disconnected from reality and international law, and in fact the international consensus on the question of Palestine, as the kind of voices we've been hearing coming out of the Trump administration and indeed on the show. Now, with specific respects to Salam Fayyad, he is not a serving member of the Palestinian Authority, nor was he nominated by the Palestinian Authority, but he was in fact nominated by the Secretary General of the United Nations in his individual capacity. But he was blocked by the United States on the basis not of any associations he had, but purely on the basis of his national identity. Right. In other words, only because he was Palestinian. And what we're hearing now is that, in fact, it's a 2-for-1 deal.
Let me give Scotty a chance, because I see she wanted to get in there. Go ahead, Scotty, before we go to
It's interesting that my colleague right there uses words like perception, suspect, potential, we were going to. That's right, that was in the past. And the American people did not like the diplomatic relations, obviously, that the Democratic Party and the President Obama, Secretary of State Kerry, and the entire administration had for the last 8 years. It has not helped. And so all that we're seeing right now is a readjustment and a clear-cut message being sent to the UN that it is not the same. And in fact, when you bring up things like this person had worked with the Obama administration or even the Bush administration, a Republican, that
but
only
he referenced
adds to
the Reagan, Scotty, he referenced the Reagan administration there, not the Obama administration. I guess my question is, his point
since the 80s. I hate to tell him that. I mean, my boombox is gone. I now have a DVD player.
Okay, his point was that if there are a lot of resolutions that have come out against Israel at the UN, is it not understandable in light of the fact that it is the Israelis who are occupying Palestinian land? It is not the Palestinians who are occupying Israeli land. Why does the Trump administration feel like it has to take a more, shall we say, pronounced position than even, shall we say, the standard bearer for many Republicans, the Reagan administration itself?
Well, let me ask this question. Was there not anybody else in this world that you think that would be qualified to take this position? Why this gentleman, who I agree has an excellent resume? He is phenomenal. He has worked with both sides of the aisle. He has worked with different groups. There's no doubt. This is not against him. This is more, like you said, the country that he's coming from, a country that the United States does not recognize as actually being a state. So why would we recognize somebody to be in such a key role as what is going on with Syria right now, based on the nationality?
Recognizing your racism. You said very clearly.
That is not racism at all.
It has nothing to do with the individual.
Absolutely. It has to do with where he's come and the country he represents. We do it all. That is what the United Nations is.
He does not represent, he has no official function. It's because of the countries he's from. Because in your view, and people like you, the real issue here, in your perception, in your alternative facts world, Israel is in fact under Palestinian occupation.
No, it's actually a fact that the UN does not recognize Palestine, and this is officially does not recognize them as a state. So it's not me. I am speaking in diplomatic terms, unlike you, who's obviously going in emotional.
To this nomination, you're bringing up.
Let's move things along a bit. Let's move things along a bit, and we haven't heard from Mukhtar in a bit. I want to get your take on this. Whether the U.S.
issue concerning the specific candidate, the best answer was done by an Israeli journalist. You know, just there was a good article about 6 reasons why the Americans are blocking that. It was an article in Haaretz written by Barak Ravid, who is a diplomatic correspondent following all these issues. And he said a wonderful sentence. He said that it was not an anti-Israel initiative, and blocking it will neither serve the Israeli interest nor the U.S. one. And this is part of the reality. You know, have to take in consideration that extreme right wing now is governing in both countries, the state as well as in Israel, as it was said, and I totally agree. You know, the real problem is how to end the occupation of the Israeli. Then I'm sure there will be no resolution against Israel if there are so many resolutions, because it's still continuing. And there was no final solution to this problem. And this is the kind of the priority. Working, you know, when I served as ambassador to the UN, it was very clear that the extreme majority of people, they think that for the U.S., even at that time, there was a double standard when it comes to this specific issue of applauding whatever Israel is doing, even if it is not in the interest of the Israeli. You know, you say the left side, how they were reacting, and I think this is the real problem.
All right, Scotty, very briefly, do you think there is a serious possibility that the U.S. could withdraw or drastically slash funding to the UN? Do you think there's a serious possibility that could really happen?
Absolutely, and the ripples that it would cause across the world would be horrific in some areas, but not necessarily against the United States. Once again, this administration has said, we have put a lot of money into this organization. What has it done to help our interests when we're fighting terrorism around the world and here at home? So absolutely, I think, and this is coming from both sides. When you have Chuck Schumer himself talking about this disappointment in the debate in December, you know that both sides, now Republicans and Democrats, can agree that some things need to change.
Scotty, wouldn't that increase the cost to the U.S. in providing a more stable world that is conducive for American trade and investment and tourism around the world?
Has the UN been helping with that in the past to the U.S.?
But my question is,
no, we've seen more trade.
Do American taxpayers really think that it would be cheaper for the U.S. to try and achieve those global goals unilaterally without the UN?
I think right now the American taxpayers feel like they have been absolutely taken for a ride with 22% of the total budget of the UN coming from the American taxpayers, and they're not seeing a return on their investment.
All right, we've got 45 seconds. Moeen, what kind of world will it be if the US does, if the Trump administration does change its commitment to the UN in such a drastic way?
You know, probably a better and safer world, certainly based on what we've heard from your guest this past half hour. Look, like throwing up smoke screens like Palestine is not a state recognized by the UN, that's thoroughly irrelevant. There is no criteria that special envoys need to be citizens of recognized member states of the United Nations. This is simply pandering to Israel, pure and simple.
Right, we're going to have to end it there, I'm afraid. Sorry. I know we can go on discussing this all day. It's been a lively discussion. Let's thank our guests very much for their contributions. Moeen Rabbani, Ambassador Mukhtar Lamani, and Scotty Neil Hughes. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, or for further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team here for now, it's goodbye.